We're back with part 2. Dose. Do. I'm here with Nick Costanis, and we're going to tell you a little bit more about Liberty University and the Falwell influence here in Lynchburg, Virginia.
Yeah, I mean, you really, like I said earlier, you really can't talk about Lynchburg without mentioning either Jerry Falwell, Liberty University, Thomas Road Baptist Church, moral majority.
Yes.
Lynchburg, and I don't have to say this because I was, born and raised here, but it's an interesting city.
Mm-hmm.
For some of the wrong reasons, maybe, but it's fascinating nonetheless.
Yeah.
And, anyone who's currently a Lynchburg resident, I would say on a day-to-day, basis, has some kind of a contact or influence with the organization, the Falwell organization. Now, for those of you who don't know, Jerry Falwell was a very prominent televangelist, a very politically motivated one.
Yes.
He founded Thomas Road Baptist Church, I guess in the late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah, it's been a while.
He founded Liberty University,
Mm-hmm.
which at the time I think was, what was it called? Baptist College or
yeah, because I remember being back up north and thinking, oh, maybe I'll go there to become a youth pastor.
Oh,
yeah. We got stories.
Yeah. But it went on to become Liberty University.
Yeah.
Lynchburg Christian Academy, Thomas Road Baptist Church, and the Moral Majority, which was
in the 80s.
Yeah, in the 80s. They say that was the interest group that elected Reagan in
exactly.
1980.
Yep.
That's
what I heard.
Yeah, mobilized the Christian right and really brought the religious right into the political mainstream.
Yes.
I mean, they really were partially responsible for making the Republican Party not just a home for libertarian, laissez-faire, free market ideologues and military folks, but also for social conservatives.
Mm-hmm.
And Falwell was instrumental in that. There's a quote, and I don't know if it's like apocryphal or what, but there's a quote that Jerry Falwell said that the separation of church and state was an idea invented by Satan to prevent Christians from running their own country. And I thought it was Thomas Jefferson, silly me. Yeah, but Jerry Falwell, was very politically motivated. Yeah. And you still see his legacy today.
Oh yeah, in everything in the city, it's ingrained in everything. I mean, I just think about all the property that they own here. I mean, the mall, the Sears moves out, Liberty moves in with their online classes on that end of the thing. They own Candler Station, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
They've prevented. I was actually surprised when a Hot Topic made it into Lynchburg.
Or even like Spencer's.
Yeah.
It's like Spencer's.
That's even worse, I think.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is... Spencer's is no longer... I remember when it was a joke store, and you could buy masks.
I'm disappointed with Spencer's now, man.
They're a little filthy now.
Well, they're no offense to, any bros, but they're kind of broified. They've got the whole college, thing going now, which, I rushed for a fraternity, and then subsequently dropped out 2 days later. So that's just my opinion.
After rushing
and winning the confidence of all the brothers there.
Screw them.
Yeah, screw them. But yeah, I mean, they've got an exorbitant amount of power and influence. I mean, like the old Craddock-Terry building, which was an old warehouse and nothing. They took that. I think recently they purchased or given or bequeathed or whatever some property out in near the Parkway.
Oh, okay, all right, yeah.
It's like a park or something. Which that's interesting because, well, for many reasons. And this gets onto the topic, I think, of like tax exemption. Mm-hmm. Like they're a religious organization, obviously, a political one, and yet they get tax exemption.
Oh yeah. And
the way they behave is, I mean, it's almost like from Donald Trump's playbook, buying up all this property and putting their name on it, and it's like they're almost a venture capitalist in some regard. Not to say there's anything wrong with a religious organization doing that, but it's that strange marriage between Ayn Rand libertarianism and religious Christian fundamentalism, which you would think would be mutually exclusive, or at least at odds to some extent. But they kind of embrace that philosophy.
Yeah.
And so now, like you said, they're buying up all this property, and they're like,
Yeah, they basically, I mean, there's those stickers now on people's cars, if I'm not mistaken, is about that. Take back our city.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about that, but someone told me that that is specifically about people, you know, trying to gain back more influence. Because, I mean, we've been fortunate in our last few elections that, like, you know, and I don't know if I should say fortunate enough, but, like, it leaned towards the way that I like to vote.
Yeah, sure.
And it's surprising based on, you know, what you see in these areas. Like, it was really shocking to see, you know, the voter turnout and watching those numbers show up that night in all the districts. And
are you referring to the presidential elections or the city council?
Well, a little bit of each, actually.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, even for presidential elections, you know, Lynchburg certainly is goes red in this part of Virginia.
Right.
But the margins are pretty surprising. It's like 40-60 or something.
It's getting,
and, you know, there are significant, like, African-American and other minority groups that, you know, demographic factors that kind of account for that. But even still, it is surprising. And I thought, you know, the last city council election was really surprising. I think there were 3 open seats this last election, and there were 3.
With Joan Foster?
Yeah, Joan Foster, and there were 3 open seats, and all 3 seats were secured by candidates that were supported by the Democratic Party. Which was a complete surprise, since Liberty definitely supported the others.
Right.
And the fact that it was a clean sweep for those 3, I thought was impressive.
Even driving around, I was quite surprised to see the amount of, you know, or at least even just the balance of, you know, the signs you see on people's, like, yards. I was like, wow, I expected a lot more, you know, to lean the other way, but apparently not. But I want to touch a little bit on that whole religion and politics thing and the separation of it. And I think this goes beyond Lynchburg, but it starts in places like Lynchburg where, like, it needs to stay out. Like, it really does. Like, it's infuriating that people base their decision making on a specific religion like this when it just shouldn't be. Like,
I can understand individuals making decisions.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, even if you're a congressman or a senator or the president, and you make a decision based on your personal conscience, like, on, you know, based on personal conscience, and if that is influenced by religion, I mean, I think that it's the natural course of action then. You know, to do that. You know, if you're against, even if you're against gay marriage, you know, if you're pro-life, whatever, if you think that's right, I mean, obviously, you know, you're gonna vote that way. It's, you know, we're a free country. You're absolutely allowed to vocalize that, act on it. But when you try to impress those same values on other people, that's where I've got a problem.
Yes.
And that's really where I think the religious right becomes problematic.
Right.
No one's saying that they can't hold their views, or that they can't, you know, try to exercise them politically. But when you try to dominate society in the way that they're trying to, you know, like the moral majority, you know, when Falwell founded that, it was the idea was that, you know, the United States was suffering from moral decay. That, you know, the 70s were a high point, you know, as far as, like, crime was concerned. The American people, I think, were very dissatisfied. And there was this sense of moral outrage. And every so often, I think in American history, and I assume world history as well, you see periods, kind of like cycles, where moral outrage or very strong sense of moral resurgence emerges. And that happened in the 80s.
Yeah.
And Americans were afraid, and Falwell capitalized on that fear, I think, and founded the moral majority. And it was incredibly powerful. And, you know, from that point on, I mean, you can make the argument before, but from that point on, the religious right became a potent force. You can make the argument that they helped elect George W. Bush. It certainly helped, I think, even Junior. As well. You know, when the neoconservative movement was at its height, they had strong support from, you know, religious conservatives, especially during his re-election campaign. But, you know, like I said, it's a cycle. Like, at the end of the 80s, the moral majority disbanded. And Falwell was like, the religious right is here to stay. You know, he had a pretty optimistic view of it. But you know, those kinds of outrages happen. Like with the whole D&D thing. Like, that's a good example.
Oh, yes.
Like Dungeons and Dragons. Like,
Dungeons and Dragons.
Like, there's this craze during the 80s, like this kind of vitriolic witch hunt against D&D.
That was ridiculous.
And it was a part of a larger trend, that whole kind of moral resurgence. You know, that was when you had the whole Satanism scares, that there are all these satanic cells operating throughout the U.S.
Like terrorists.
Yeah, like terrorists. And, you know, the funny thing is that, like, actual, like, LaVey Satanists.
You're right.
We're like, really? Like, you know, we're that powerful?
Awesome!
Yeah. Somehow we have all this political power, you know, we never knew we had. Unlike those Christians who, you know, of course, they're persecuted and have no political power whatsoever.
Yes, this is horrible.
But yeah, it's crazy when stuff like that happens. And, like, I don't know, I'm just terrified of the thought that any one religion can have a monopoly in politics.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that religious minorities like myself, you know, we have our own fear of that. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's hard, because a lot of mainstream Christians, even fundamentalist Christians as well, have a hard time empathizing with minorities. Mm-hmm. And this goes not just to religion, but other issues, race, you know,
whatever.
Yeah. There's an empathetic disconnect. Mm-hmm. You really don't know what it's like to be a minority unless you've been one.
Right.
And there is always this lingering fear that when the majority becomes too powerful, and I don't want to say this like because as if I'm like anti-democratic or anti, you know, majority will, but there exists a tyranny of the majority on occasion. And as a minority, it's scary when you hear a lot of people rallying against what you are.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, I don't want to compare myself to the Jews, because I think those kinds of
pretty
analogies
much just like, I mean, D&D, the Jews, it's pretty much on the level.
Well, it's the same idea that there's this I don't know, this social monopoly that needs to be established in order for it to function. That everybody has to think the same way. There has to be this conformity, and if it doesn't, then there are these malcontents who want to, you know, hurt the status quo or you know, undermine the authority or whatever. And so, you know, when you start hearing things like that, where, you know, Falwell went on, like CNN, and was talking about, or right after 9/11, when he blamed Wiccans and, you know, gays and ACLU and People for the American Way, you know, he blamed all those people for 9/11. Mm-hmm. That was, you know, God's wrath. Yeah, I mean, that's scary.
Yeah.
I mean, that really is, because you know that this man commands a considerable amount of money, resources, power, manpower. Yeah, and that is kind of terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, that's insane. That's just like, that's terrifying to think that someone with any form of power or any form of influence whatsoever can say something like that, especially in today's day and age, in a world that's slowly moving on from where he was back in the 80s. I remember, like, you know, I mean, I was younger, but I remember that time. Unfortunately, I was more ingrained in it as well. Yeah. However, now that I look back on it, and now I think about him saying these things like that, like, he's having an influence on all the kids that attend his school, all the people that attend this is something I want to talk about too, his mega church.
Yeah.
And, like, you know, I mean, that word is like wildfire amongst, especially amongst, like, you know, the far right conservative Christians. And when that spreads across the country, that's dangerous. That's incredibly dangerous.
I think so. And actually, just to put this in some historical context, when LCA was founded, or it came to prominence in the 60s, it explicitly labeled itself and advertised itself as a Christian white school.
Wow.
They did not admit African Americans. And Jerry Falwell, at the time, was a firm supporter. And you can look this up. This is verifiable. You can check it out. He was very anti-desegregation. He campaigned against Martin Luther King Jr. He said that that Dr. King's affiliation with communist and socialist groups was very disconcerting, and that essentially, you know, his vision of the United States was one that was segregated, or at least of Lynchburg, Virginia, was one that was segregated. I heard a story that the church owned a pool at one time, Thomas Road. I think it's Thomas Road. I'm not sure the details, but they owned a pool. And when the call came, it must have been LCA, but when the call came to desegregate, and when that was federally enforced, rather than admit African Americans, they filled the pool in with concrete.
That's horrible.
Yeah. And Falwell was very a very strong supporter of the apartheid government in South Africa. He thought that thought that the attempts that were going on at the time to kind of discredit or to put pressure on the government shouldn't be done. So there are all these things about Jerry Falwell that a lot of people don't really know or think about. And
you see him as good old Grandpa Falwell, you know.
And, you know, maybe in person he was a nice guy, but his policies and his statements really speak for themselves. Another story, so this kind of gets onto their more, I guess, more capitalistic side. But, I mean, the organization's taken in a ton of money, and they're very business-oriented. And that's something that I think a lot of people know, like they see it, but they don't want to admit it. Like, I remember Falwell came very close on several occasions, I think, into going into bankruptcy. Financially, the organization was a mess because, especially as the moral majority were on, interest kind of declined, and you know, they started to lose funding and whatnot, and mostly because he was, you know, saying that mission accomplished. So, you know, if there's no immediate fear, people aren't going to donate money as readily. And I think he got bailed out by Sun Myung Moon, the South Korean televangelist, the guy that has the mass weddings, where he will marry 1,000 people in a sports arena. Yeah, he and Falwell had a pretty tight relationship, and I think he bailed him out. He's been bailed out by a lot of like Texas oilmen and like other, you know, conservative interests. So so fiscally he's been a wreck time and time, you know, on occasion, and it really wasn't until their online program, which has been very lucrative, that they've really, you know, become a major cash cow. But I've got a personal anecdote though that hits onto their their fiscal endeavors, and that was a friend of mine who I think this was a long time ago, but a friend of mine used to work for social services, and I think he investigated welfare fraud or something. So he was, you know, he knew the laws as they pertain to like federal benefits and whatnot, and he said that they'd get time and time again representatives from Liberty University and Thomas Road who would come to the offices, and they would try to sign up all these single women for single mothers for all these benefits. And my friend was interested in what was going on, and he kind of inquired further, and he found out that, and I don't exactly know what this is, but they ran a long time ago an orphanage, and they would take single mothers from, you know, impoverished backgrounds, and they would put the kids up encourage the women to put their kids up for adoption. Jesus. And what they were doing was they were taking these kids, finding all the federal benefits they could in order to, you know, for like, you know, to feed them and take care of them. And then they were selling the kids at to adoption agencies, which, you know, from what I hear, they're, you know, it's not cheap to adopt a child.
No.
And so I don't know how much money they were making for that. I you know, it sounds awful to say that they were doing that for nefarious purposes, but
right. Well, even if they were running an orphanage, the tax breaks they would probably get on that, unless they're falling under the religious exemption, like are probably enormous. Because I know, like, even on a personal level, like, not that I've ever considered adopting, but I know people who have considered it, and like, it's pretty startling the amount of like tax breaks you get for, like, it's a specific part of the W-4, W-2, and that you can fill out. And so I just wonder if maybe that even ties into it too, if they were benefiting for something like that.
Yeah, and actually this particular friend of mine, his wife, I think it was his wife, she was put up for adoption through that program. That's how he came to kind of to find out about some of this. And she was separated from her siblings and her mother because I think her mother went to Thomas Road, and Falwell told her in person. Somehow this was back, you know, before the organization became real big.
Right.
And she asked him, you know, she confided in him that, you know, she was going through a rough marriage and she had all these kids, and he said, "Oh, give them to us," essentially, put them up for adoption. And so she did, and it literally split the family apart.
Yeah, I imagine it would. That's crazy. Yeah, I'd never heard of any of that before. That's interesting.
And again, like, I have no way of verifying a lot of this.
Right.
It is anecdotal. Take it for what it's worth, but that is what I heard. But yeah, so there's that. And you see now, fast forwarding to today, you see, that even though Dr. Falwell's dead, they're still carrying his cause forward. They're still carrying on his cause. There's still a very strong, I think, Liberty Council or some legal organization that tries to fight to push certain religious agendas, like Christian prayer in public school,
right.
Pro-life and whatnot issues. But yeah, I mean, they're still very much alive and well.
Oh yeah.
They're just not on a national scale. I think they're really honing and trying to consolidate their base at home more so than
right
going abroad.
Well, that's a funny thing. It's such a misconception. A lot of the things that they complain about public prayer or in school, praying in schools, or like, as crazy as this is going to sound based on all the videos I've done and the talking we've done. When I was in high school, in my high school yearbook, I wanted to put a scripture in there because I was heavily into church at the time and so on and so forth. And the school gave me problems, but I contacted a legal organization about it, and they said there's absolutely nothing they can do to stop you from doing that.
Yeah.
So clearly there's nothing, at least in 1993, stopping people from praying in schools.
Sure,
and I'm pretty sure now there's still no problem with that. So
that's an issue, like prayer in public school. That's something that comes up a lot, and unfortunately, I think the right's manipulated the issue a little more than people on the left. It's become something where a lot of moderate people are like, well, what's wrong with like prayer in school? Like, you can pray whenever you want. And what they don't realize is when I went to school in Lynchburg, Virginia, there was a lot of religious influence. And we had a moment of silence. But it was assumed that was for you to pray. And every kid in class was praying.
Oh
and
my God.
They just didn't come out and say it. And for someone like myself who didn't believe that, it was awkward as hell.
I would imagine.
Having to sit there, and because if you don't like pray,
and you're looking around,
everyone's good, like going to know. Like it's people are eventually going to notice,
and you're going to stand out,
and if you do conform, that's ridiculous. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You're just faking it and conforming to to redirect heat away from you.
Yeah, and that sucks.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And what they don't realize is, no one has a problem with a moment of silence.
Yeah.
I don't think. Like, even the most extreme atheists, I don't think would have a problem with a moment of silence. And a moment of silence that satisfies everybody, I think.
Yeah.
Like, if you're Christian, you can pray. If you're Buddhist, you can meditate. If you're an atheist, just reflect on your day. Just take some time to
moment of silence is a nice thing.
Yeah, it's great. And but that's the thing. When they talk about prayer in public school, they're not talking about kids praying. They're talking about classes praying,
gathering around.
Exactly.
Or something.
It's like, let us take out our Bible from behind the teacher's stand and read a passage. Or that's that in my mind when I hear prayer in public school. That's what I think about. And that is what the moral majority supported. They supported having Christian prayer in school as a formal event.
Going outside, burning the science books, and
that's just a few. Well, as long as the science book also taught creative or intelligent design.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But
yeah, that's a funny thing. That whole debate. That's a whole other subject all in and of itself.
Yeah.
But moving here and seeing Thomas Road Baptist Church, like we went over there a few times with our kids. We've got kids, and they have something called Kids Cove there.
Yeah.
And some people around here told us about it. We're like, oh yeah, let's go there. Let's bring the kids over there. So it's a Noah's Ark themed, like amazing, probably $50,000 playground, indoor playground, and it's cool. Until you realize everything that's going on there. You walk into Thomas Road Baptist Church and it's paved in marble.
Oh yeah.
And coffee shops and just these stone pillars leading down and just this massive complex like nothing I'd ever seen before.
Yeah.
And I go, wow, if you just had worship in a barn somewhere with a PA system, where could that money have gone? Like,
yeah, well, and that's the thing. I don't know how much of their money they spend on feeding the poor, helping, impoverished third world countries. Mm-hmm. But a heck of a lot of it goes into buying up new property, expanding the student base, making their buildings look, ostentatious and, elaborate, buying, crazy sound systems.
Right.
It's like...
Isn't that anti-Christ?
Yeah, they a lot of times, they call the Catholic Church the whore of Babylon because of its, the Vatican and, because it's ostentatious and gaudy. But Protestant churches now are getting just as bad.
Just as bad. It's the Americanized version of Roman Catholic churches. Yeah. It's just... Oh, this new pope, what is it?
Oh, yeah, Pope Francis. Yeah. He did call, recently, I think he called marijuana, though,
that's evil. My only problem I got with him.
But,
I'm calling you out, Pope Francis. Come on the show.
That evil marijuana.
But, yeah, everything else, it's just like, all of a sudden, you're like, whoa, this guy is actually, making some sense all of a sudden. So.
It was a surprise. I mean, he's from where? Argentina?
Yeah.
They didn't expect him to, they had... I remember, leading up to it, they had a lot of coverage, and they're like, keep an eye out for this guy, and this guy. And near the bottom, I was like, Pope Francis, But he got it.
Good for him.
Yeah, I know. I really admired a lot of his stances.
Yeah. Even that, I know it's just an internet meme that you're seeing, but have you seen the one of, Pope John Paul the Third or whatever it was, on the, he's got the red and the gold and everything around him, and if you look at the way that he stripped it down, even just symbolically, that means a lot, I think, to look at him and go, wow, he's not wearing the red shoes, he's not wearing the fancy anything, he is a person for the people, I believe.
Right. Yeah, have you heard, I don't know if this is true, but I heard it from a pretty reputable source, I saw it somewhere, that occasionally at night, he will leave the Vatican, dressed in plain clothes, and will go into some of the slums in Rome to take care of people.
That's awesome.
So it's kind of like the Batman of popes. And at night he's
that is the greatest thing. You need to make a T-shirt of that.
Batman of popes. But so he seems like a good guy. Washes paupers' feet.
Yeah.
And he seems like he's actually practicing when he preaches.
Yeah.
Which is a far cry from a lot of people here in the United States.
I'm going to go over to Thomas Road Baptist Church tomorrow and see if one of the Falwells will wash my feet for me.
Yeah, good luck with that. Well, the Pope's doing it,
Hey.
Yeah, Jesus probably would have done it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah, actually, my mom, who is Wiccan, one of her friends in her coven, lives down the street from, I think Jonathan, it's Jerry Jr.
Jerry Jr.
And, it's funny. It's funny, I live down the street from where Jerry Falwell Sr. used to live. Mm-hmm. And Tara, my mom's friend, lives down the street from where Jerry Jr. lives. And so these Wiccans nearby. Maybe they're right about the whole, cells of, of evil people. But, they were saying that one time, apparently every summer when they have graduation, they have this big party at his house. This really big affair, and my mom and Tara and the coven were doing a ritual right in their front yard as people were pulling in to go to the.
How beautiful!
It's funny stuff, but and have you seen Maisel Falwell, Jerry Falwell's wife, around town before?
I probably have. I don't know her by sight.
Yeah, sometimes you'll see their SUVs drive around. They've got the dark tinted windows and
their caravan.
Yeah. Actually, my sister, who's studying to be a cosmetologist, used to. I think she used to do an apprenticeship at one hair salon here in town, and it was the one that Maisel Falwell went to.
Wow.
And apparently, the guy that owned the store is gay. And he would personally do her hair. And I always wondered if she knew. Does she know that the guy who's doing your hair is gay? Or if she does know, I wonder if it's kind of like how, I don't know, back in the pre-50s, that's how, a lot of black people would
right
fulfill those kinds of...
that is an interesting thing. A lot of times, I know this from coming from a Baptist church, I had a gay friend that attended our youth group at our church. And I remember it was so easy before he was there or when he wasn't attending for them to preach out against it and how evil and wrong it was. But whenever he was there, the subject was dropped. They treated him nicely, which is nice, but I also feel like it's very hypocritical because they were saying one thing and they were just humoring him the rest of the time.
Oh, yeah.
So I just don't know. That stuff like that is actually what really got me away from the whole, at least the Baptist Church and the Christian faith, because there was too much of that going on. And then coming here was really the nail in the coffin for me. I was just like, this is just crap. And I'm not saying that every Christian out there or everyone who has faith in is a terrible person.
Right, no.
It's just the people that I've met since then. It's just not the person I want to be or the people I want to be around. So.
Right. No, I absolutely agree. It's rough. And, because Liberty University is such a strong presence, Lynchburg, I think, has roughly 77,000 people. And LU, I think, has a student body of like 12, 13,000 maybe. So it's a good chunk.
Yeah, definitely.
Compared to the actual city population. And like an obscene 50,000 people enrolled in the online programs across, total. But when you increase the size of the city that much, you run into a lot of these Liberty students. And that's an issue too, because you'll run across people my age who are affiliated with LU, and a lot of them, like we mentioned earlier, are on a mission. At the Unitarian Church, there's one time, I don't know if I told you this story, but there's one time we were doing a child care event at the church. This was late in the afternoon too, around 7 or 8, and three or four young guys come up to the door, and I think my mom was going to get something, and they stopped her, and they started interrogating her about what the church was about, just things like that. And my mom's like, well, what are you guys doing? And of course one of them had a Bible, and later on, a few minutes later, they're in the church. No one invited them in. They just came in, on their own volition, and there were people, in other parts of the church, and they're just going around cornering people, talking to them. And this is in another church. So they're invading. They never got permission. I mean, they never asked anybody. They just walked in and start, talking to people. And one of the guys who went there is definitely an academic, intellectual type. And he was, standing his ground and explaining to them why he believed what he believed, and really getting into a debate with them on their own terms, using the Bible and engaging them. And I don't think they were used to that. I think they were used to either
people cowering,
exactly. They in a sense, it's almost like coercion. They kind of threaten you into submission. And they did. They met some resistance there, but it's that thing happens all over the place, and it makes me wonder if how many churches in here are in Lynchburg not only have dealt with that, but have succumbed to it, who have actually become aligned to LU, because I know for a fact that we get applicants at the Unitarian Church for different job positions, and we get a lot of Liberty students.
Interesting.
And they've definitely, I don't want to use the word infiltrate, but essentially have infiltrated or try to infiltrate a bunch of different churches. And naturally that changes, the dynamics of the church and their ideology and what they preach. So they're almost like converting entire churches. And you see a lot of non-denominational churches around Lynchburg too. And even Methodist churches are becoming very evangelical. It's interesting.
I think we should just lay waste to Lynchburg and start over.
Well, that's one of the interesting things too I want to mention. Lynchburg, throughout most of its early history, it was a big tobacco trading town. It was kind of known as a rough and tumble kind of town at the foothills of the Appalachians, and really up until the 50s, it was kind of a sleazy city. There are tons of brothels and gambling dens in downtown Lynchburg, and it was a seedy place. It was that kind of place that provides fertile ground for someone like Falwell
to come in and
clean up
this town.
Clean it up. And yeah, so I find that really interesting.
Yeah.
You know, it's fascinating how that kind of stuff happens.
Yeah, I remember hearing stories when I first moved here about the cheesy western down at the tea room. Is that what they call it?
Oh yeah, the tea room.
And so I've only been there once, but I've been told that like not so long ago, like there was black people ate outside, white people ate inside there, and like it seems like that's one of the few staples. Eventually, obviously, it evolved and came along, but that's like one of those remnants of that time, I think, in a sense, where it's grown now and it's, you know, beyond that, but nonetheless, like, to hear that, like, was something that was still happening, you know, 30, 40 years ago is pretty crazy, so.
It is, absolutely. Yeah. Liberty, man.
Yep.
And the church itself, you know, it's amazing how many people I've talked to who end up, like, just either going all in for it or against it.
Yeah.
This goes back to something you mentioned way earlier, but there's a sizable percentage of the Lynchburg population who really are kind of anti-liberty, who don't like liberty. A lot of the people who live out in the 03 area, the 03 zip code, you know, that used to be the affluent, it kind of still is, the affluent sector of Lynchburg, where you had the local elites, the old money. And they resent liberty, not so much because of its religious affiliation, but because it's usurped their position as the the shot callers in Lynchburg.
That's funny.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, Lynchburg's an interesting town. So yeah, so there's your view of somebody who has moved here over the last 10 years and someone who grew up here. What do you think? If you like it, post something.
Or don't if you don't like it too. Yeah.
Like it. Yeah, give us,
if you want to take us to task.
Let's let's bring this back. If you got something to say about it, put in the comments below, and we'll gladly come back and do another one. And as always, if you're loving these, like we're loving these, feel free to subscribe, pass this along to anybody else who you might think might like to hear such a conversation. Put it on that Facebook there or the Google Plus or whatever it is. And I'm gonna wrap this up like I do every night. Go make somebody smile. Don't forget to make somebody smile tomorrow. Make yourself a better person than you were today, and let's make this world spin a little happier. I'm Jason Oliveira. This is Nick Costanis, and this has been The Road to 40, episode 90, and we will catch you on the next one. Take care, gents and ladies.